There's nothing especially notable about the financial sector being in trouble. Moreover, the crisis was effectively managed, and as it turned out, there was no headline-making casualty. There was no Barings or Lehman Brothers. Nevertheless, it was the most severe systemic financial crisis that London has ever experienced. And not just London, some 50 countries around the world had financial crises with runs on banks and stock market slumps. It was the most extensive and acute global financial crisis ever. Sunday, March 2nd, 2025, Maneco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. Well, today we're going to look at war, gold, and the great financial crisis of 1914. As I've said many times, I think one needs to look at history in order to try to ascertain what might happen in the future. So what about the live stream? Well, that's going to be tomorrow, Monday, March 3rd at the same time, 8 p.m. London, 3 p.m. Eastern time. Hopefully, Clive will join us as well. I don't have to tell you the details about what happened in the Oval Office on Friday. It was an amazing event, in my opinion. I'd never seen an exchange between world leaders like that. And I'm not going to go too much into detail about what I think happened there. But one thing that I will say that is really important is that President Trump told President Zelensky he was gambling with World War III. He also told him in no uncertain terms that come back to see me when you want peace. So even though President Trump looks on the surface to be a president that wants peace, and that happened, of course, during his first 4 years, didn't start any wars. National security, though, is really important. And before we go into the main topic of this video, I want to talk about the national security crisis no one is talking about, and we'll also talk about the sponsor of this video. So America's national security is at risk. China and Russia control nearly 100% of the world's antimony supply. Yes, antimony, a metal the U.S. cannot go to war without. Am I for war? No, but national security, as I said, is really important. And if you're not prepared, the world is getting more and more dangerous, as we're seeing. So you might be thinking, antimony, yeah, I don't blame you, because up until 3 weeks ago, I never heard of the metal. And it's coincidental that I'm doing this report here for this sponsor, because prior to hearing from them, I had a Zoom meeting with a friend that is heavily involved in the mining industry. And we talked to a CEO of a mining company, and they spoke about antimony. And I asked the CEO, what is antimony, right? So you're not the only one. No antimony means no bullets, no missiles, no military electronics. I mean, never heard of the thing and didn't realize it's that important. So this metal is essential for ammunition, armor-piercing rounds, missile guidance systems, and nuclear weapons. Yet the U.S. produces almost none of it. For decades, the West has relied on China as the most dominant supplier, ignoring the growing risk. Now the crisis is a reality. China has just banned antimony exports, sending prices to a record $47,500 per ton. The Pentagon is scrambling to secure alternative sources, but the reality is stark. Yes, the U.S. military has only 17 days worth of reserves. So without a secure supply, America's defense systems are vulnerable. And this is where the sponsor comes in. This is where Military Metals, U.S. ticker MILIF, and in Canada, MILI, comes in. The company is securing Western-controlled antimony supply, positioning itself as one of the only publicly traded solutions to this crisis. Their flagship resource in Slovakia holds over 60,000 tons of high-grade antimony worth $2.5 billion at today's price. This is one of the largest known deposits outside China and Russia. This resource is based on a Soviet-era historical resource study, which is being currently converted to a modern compliant resource. In addition, Military Metals owns two past-producing North American assets, including the West Gore mine in Canada, which contains surface piles of ore from previous production. So with the Pentagon and NATO rushing to secure domestic supply, Military Metals is in a prime position to be part of the solution. And we've already seen that the U.S. Department of Defense invested $59 million into Perpetual Resources for its antimony project. With NATO defense spending projected to exceed $1.5 trillion, Military Metals could be next in line for government backing. So the urgency is clear. Without antimony, modern warfare is impossible. Yet investors have barely begun to recognize this opportunity. This is one of the most overlooked national security investments opportunities. Antimony prices are soaring. The West is desperate for supply, and Military Metals is one of the few companies positioned to capitalize. The world is waking up to the antimony crisis. The question is, are you ahead of the curve? So just wanted to let you know, there's a link below in the description to Military Metals website. And just wanted to remind you, I'm not a financial advisor, and I recommend you do your due diligence and your research. So now let's go back to war, gold, and the great financial crisis of 1914. And before we go deeper into the topic, I wanted to quote Alan Greenspan. He wrote an article for Foreign Affairs back in September of 2014 entitled Golden Rule, Why Beijing is Buying Gold, of course. No questions are raised when gold and direct claims to gold are offered in payment of an obligation. It was the only form of payment, for example, that exporters to Germany would accept as World War II was drawing to a close. Today, the acceptance of fiat money, currency not backed by an asset of intrinsic value, rests on the credit guarantee of sovereign nations endowed with effective taxing power, a guarantee that in crisis conditions has not always matched the universal acceptability of gold. Just wanted to put that out there. Some of you might be asking, would they try to confiscate our gold if there were to be a war? Anything's possible, but I think the probability these days is lower than it was, as we're going to see in 1914 and in previous episodes of war, like 1797 in the Napoleonic Wars. And why do I say that? Well, because gold hasn't been used as money for, over 100 years, at least here in the UK, and internationally for over 50 years. So I don't think the public has that much of an exposure to gold where governments would want to confiscate it. But as I said, anything's possible. But I'm still holding on to my gold. So let's go to the great financial crisis of 1914. And this is an article that I picked up here from Professor Richard Roberts. He's from the Institute of Contemporary British History, King's College London. And ironically, this article comes from the LBMA website. And we all know what's going on at the LBMA right now. But sometimes you have to exploit what the enemy provides to you, right? And in this case, it's provided this article. So let's go through parts of this article. In July 1914, as it became clear that a European war was on the cards, London, the world's foremost international financial center, suffered an acute financial crisis. The financial markets froze, shares crashed, and depositors were unable to access their funds for days. The London Stock Exchange shut and stayed shut for 5 months. It was feared that a run on the banks had begun. threatening the country's payments and credit mechanisms. And all as Britain teetered on the verge of war and then plunged into the Armageddon. Despite its unrivaled severity, the financial crisis of 1914 is virtually unknown. The reason is straightforward. It is simply absent not only from general texts, but also from most of the specialist literature. Several journalistic accounts appeared in 1915, but ever since it has been overlooked until now, the 100th anniversary. Yeah, this article was written in 2014. Why? Well, presumably because the financial crisis was overshadowed by the diplomatic crisis and then the military conflict. The life and death struggles was more important and dramatic than the financial disintegration. Every political, social, cultural, and economic dimension of life was in crisis in the summer of 1914. There's nothing especially notable about the financial sector being in trouble. Moreover, the crisis was effectively managed, and as it turned out, there was no headline-making casualty. There was no Barings or Lehman Brothers. Nevertheless, it was the most severe systemic financial crisis that London has ever experienced. And not just London, some 50 countries around the world had financial crises with runs on banks and stock market slumps. It was the most extensive and acute global financial crisis ever. Breakdown. The countdown to war began with the assassination of Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo on 28th of June. The markets took the murder in their stride. After all, there had been Balkan crises in each of the previous 3 summers, and all had been diffused. Market perceptions of the risk of war were transformed by Austria's belligerent ultimatum to Serbia on the evening of Thursday, 23rd of July. This was the Minsky moment, when greed turned to fear, collateral damage from the diplomatic crisis before a shot had been fired. There was an immediate international scramble for liquidity, meaning the dumping of assets and the withdrawal of credit. Continental bourses crashed and there were runs on savings banks. In London, the foreign exchange and money markets broke down early in the week beginning Monday, 27th of July. Then on Friday, 31st of July, the London Stock Exchange, for the first time in its 117-year history, shut its doors. Displaced brokers and jobbers milled around Throgmorton Street like swarming ants around the destroyed heap. I know Throgmorton Street really well from having worked in the city for over 20 years, and I didn't know about this until I read this article. The English joint stock banks, which included some of the world's largest banks, became increasingly concerned about their vulnerability to a run on deposits. Their assets were becoming more and more illiquid, while their liabilities were mostly demand deposits. From Wednesday, 29 July, the banks rationed payments to depositors of gold sovereigns, £1 gold coins that were the key circulating medium paid out instead in Bank of England £5 notes, the smallest denomination banknote. Since a £5 note was the equivalent of £400 today, well, that was in 2014. Now, I'd say it's more like £2,700 because the price of gold has gone up. It was useless for everyday transactions, so recipients made their way to the Bank of England to change their notes for sovereigns, as they were free to do under the classical gold standard. This resulted in long queues that presented the appearance of a run on the bank. A Financial Times reporter found a queue of people, some 200 to 250 strong, resignedly waiting their turn to obtain access to the magical counter where cash was being poured forth in steady stream. Gold, 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 bright and yellow, hard and cold. So Up until today, the sovereign is still legally a pound, and it's legal tender. And I've got here a sovereign from 1910, and I've got also a half sovereign from 1905. These were the coins that the people queuing at the Bank of England were trying to get a hold of. They didn't want the paper. This was undoubtedly what was wanted. And when a red-cloaked official shouted ironically, "Silver, anybody wants silver? Plenty of silver going cheap," a dead silence followed. On many faces was to be observed a sardonic smile. Cheap silver was not wanted, and the outflow of the precious yellow metal continued. So maybe that's why silver has been lagging gold. Maybe the markets know something we don't. But I still think silver will continue to do well, only because these days we have nothing like a sound money system like they had back then. A financial news journalist reported witnessing an evening newspaper vendor shouting, run on the bank," to the crowd of onlookers outside the Bank of England. He summoned the policeman who arrested the newsboy. I'm going to stop right here, but you can read the rest of the article. It goes on to explain how they managed the crisis. Of course, they suspended domestically the gold standard because eventually the banks had to suspend and the Bank of England convertibility of those banknotes to the public. Pretty much what FDR did in 1933. But to the outer world, internationally, the gold standard in the UK was not suspended during World War I. And actually, a lot of gold flowed into London because it was seen as a safe haven. And it was only in 1925, under then Chancellor of the Exchequer, Winston Churchill, that the gold standard resumed domestically. But unfortunately, it only lasted until 1931. So there you go. I thought that was really interesting. And it just goes to show how gold is important. And maybe there is a link between the geopolitical worries that we have now. I mean, I've been alive for 60 years, and I've never seen the world in such turmoil, geopolitically, economically, socially, politically. And as Greenspan said, in times of major disturbances, war, chaos, you want something that doesn't require counterparty risk. And I think that's why gold is so important in times of war. And hopefully we won't have war. And even if we don't have war, I think our governments and central banks are going to continue to inflate the system. And it's still, I think, wise to hold on to your gold and silver. So with that, I'm going to wish you all a great rest of the weekend. Take care. Bye.